The night shift had a way of making everything feel like the world's afterthought. The corridors shined only because Cassian Holt made them shine, his mop whispering across tile floors, while the rest of the city dreamed of lives they could afford. He'd learned to walk softly and listen hard. The hiss of motion sensors, the rattle of an old air vent, the private grief of fluorescent lights. After midnight, Greenbridge Plaza was a glass and concrete aquarium, empty storefronts, and looping playlists, a pharmacy that never slept, a grocery manager counting registers with a pencil stub. Outside the automatic doors, the parking lot stretched wide under sodium lamps that gave the world a sickly orange halo. He liked the stillness. It let him hear himself. It gave him a rhythm when bills and notices and cracked drywall tried to take that rhythm away. Cassian carried a quiet, tall, lean beard trimmed with a pocket mirror's stubborn symmetry, hands nicked from years of work that didn't come with a nameplate. He kept a roll of duct tape on his cart the way some men carried lucky coins. When something broke, he fixed it. When a mess spilled, he cleaned it. The world was clearer when tasks had edges. At 1:14 a.m., the edges went sideways. A sound split the winter air beyond the sliding doors. A hard metallic bark, then the skitter of chrome, the sickening scrape of a heavy body against asphalt. Cassian stopped with his mop mid-pivot. Another sound followed, breath low and ragged, as if silence had been punched and left trying to stand back up. He didn't think. He pushed the cart aside and jogged for the doors. The sensors stuttered, caught him, and parted with a clumsy sigh. The parking lot was mostly empty, scattered cars like islands, a crate of wind-blown flyers tumbling toward the gutter. 20 yards out, under a jittering lamp, a motorcycle lay, at a brutal angle, its front wheel kissing the curb, its rider twisted partly beneath it. Gasoline flared a sharp, sour brightness in the cold. "Hey!" Cassian called, already moving. "Hey, don't move if you can help it!" The rider's left leg was pinned under the bike. Leather jacket, bare hands, no gloves, ground into the gravel. A visorless helmet had rolled several feet away and come to rest upside down like a tossed bowl. The man's face was cut above the eyebrow, blood stringing down toward the cheekbone. He tried to push and failed, teeth clenched. "Just don't. I've got you," Cassian said. "Training, none formal." But he had common sense, and a first aid kit velcroed to his cart because the world broke for everyone eventually. He slid his shoulder under the bike's tank, the way you slide a shoulder under grief, slow, braced, ready for the weight that doesn't belong to you. The machine was heavier than it looked. Gravity loved it like a favorite. Cassian grunted, legs burning, and tilted it just enough. "Can you pull your leg?" The rider's breath was a fog cloud. Yeah. He dragged free with a muffled curse. Cassian eased the bike down to a safer angle, kickstand scissoring open with a blessed ordinary click. Pain had a way of sharpening people. The rider's eyes were sharp now, grey-green, feral with adrenaline. He tried to sit. Cassian knelt, palm raised. "Let me look first." The left ankle was already ballooning, skin shining taut beneath shredded denim. The man flexed and hissed. Other scrapes, palms chewed by the lot, the eyebrow cut. But the ankle was loudest. "What happened?" Cassian asked, pulling a small flashlight from his belt. C-car swung out of nowhere. Door opened like the driver was mad at air. I swerved, hit the oil slick you got near that busted drain. He blew out a harsh laugh that wasn't a laugh. World's most predictable joke. I was the punchline. Cassian angled the beam. "I'll clean the slick. The drain's scheduled for repair Tuesday. Right now we need to wrap this." He looked up. "I can call an ambulance." The rider's jaw jumped. He stared past Cassian toward the dark entrance road, as if it might suddenly deliver him from the embarrassment of being horizontal. "No cops, no hospital, not unless I stop breathing." Afraid of bills. Afraid of being in debt to rooms. "With windows I can't open," the man said. "And yeah, bills. I'll deal with it. Cassian recognized that future tense lie. He'd made versions of it. "I'm Cassian," he said. "I'm just a janitor, but I'm decent at triage." The man's mouth twitched. "Name's Ridge." He swallowed. "I owe you one already." "Hold still, Ridge." From the kit, Cassian pulled an elastic bandage, a gauze square, a tiny bottle of saline that lived beside a pack of zip ties, and a folded pocket triangle for broken wrists. He rinsed the cut above Ridge's eye, patted it clean, folded gauze to the shape of calm, then wrapped it with a strip of tape from his cart. "Blink for me." Ridge blinked. "Vision's okay. Pride's a little concussed." "Can you wiggle your toes?" Ridge stared at his boot and obeyed. The movement was clumsy, but there. "Hurts like I made a deal with a devil, too bored to honor it." "We'll immobilize it," Cassian said. He tore the lid off a small box, slit it down the seams, and made a makeshift splint, padding it with a folded towel from his cart. "Duct tape's not pretty, but a lot of things that save you aren't." Ridge watched him work with a curious quiet. Under the leather, he was thick-shouldered, not huge but compact. A man built to move a heavy thing out of a worse thing's way. A patch on his jacket read Thunder County. No club name above it, no skulls. Just those words and the threadbare ghost of a triangle where something had been removed. He caught Cassian noticing, raised his chin, not defensive, just matter of fact. "I ride with friends," Ridge said. "I don't belong to anything that'll make this night longer than it should be." "I'm not a cop," Cassian said softly. "I'm a guy who doesn't like to see people bleed." That pulled something like a real laugh from Ridge. Not brightness exactly, but better than the metal scrape of a minute ago. "Tonight, that's my favorite kind of guy." Cassian finished the wrap and leaned back on his heels. "Okay, up's going to feel like betrayal. We'll do it slow." With his arm under Ridge's shoulders, he helped him sit. Ridge's breath clipped short. He swallowed 2 curses and let them go as steam into the cold. When he shifted his weight, the world turned his face white. Cassian steadied him. "Where can I take you?" "Back of the lot," Ridge said after a beat. "There's a pickup. I can get home." "You're not riding that tonight." "Wasn't planning to," Ridge said, nodding toward the truck 3 lanes over. Cassian palmed the keys from where they'd fallen in a glitter of coins and receipts, then glanced at the motorcycle. He knew just enough to be careful and not enough to be smug. Neutral, clutch, respect. He nudged it upright, let it settle, then rolled it across the paint-striped emptiness, like you roll a sleeping animal you hope stays sleeping. He parked it beside the truck and locked the front wheel with a chain Ridge fished from the cab. Then he helped Ridge into the passenger seat, careful of the ankle, careful of the things men guarded with jokes. "Give me 5 minutes," Cassian said. "I'll bring ice and a decent coffee." "You've done enough." "Probably," Cassian said, "but I'll be right back." He jogged to the plaza, grabbed a double cup and black coffee from the night clerk, who always looked like she'd rather be planning her escape route, then raided the groceries freezer for a pack of peas and negotiated with the sleepy manager. An IOU signed with a name that meant little in that office. Back at the truck, he handed Ridge the coffee and wrapped the peas in another towel. "You sure you don't want a doctor?" Ridge took the cup, stared at it like it might answer a question he hadn't asked. "Had a doctor once tell me, pain's how you know you're real." He shrugged. "I knew I was real before him." "I'll take that as a no," Cassian said. "Do you have someone waiting?" Ridge's mouth ticked sidewise. "I have a place where the walls remember my name. That's enough for tonight." He swallowed hard, then looked straight at Cassian. "You shouldn't have come out there." "I don't like sentences that start with "you shouldn't." They're almost always wrong. Ridge considered that, eyes doing the kind of measuring that wasn't about height or weight. He set the coffee in the holder, reached toward the glove compartment, and pulled a card from behind a manual. He held it out. "If you ever need anything fixed that you can't fix with a mop or tape, call this number, ask for Ridge, or just ask for the stubborn one who owes you." Cassian glanced at the card. No logo, just a number and a first name, written in a careful, unhandsome hand. "You don't owe me." "We disagree," Ridge said. He nodded toward the lot. "They'll tell stories about what you did. People do, when a thing looks like a risk. Truth is, you did the opposite of what most would. You moved toward, not away." Cassian tucked the card into his breast pocket like a small weight. "Drive. Slow. Ice 15 minutes on, 15 off. If you wake up with stars in your mouth, call 911. Ridge's laugh was softer now. "Aye, aye." He gripped the wheel, then paused. "What's your mortgage lender called?" Cassian blinked. The question punched through the skin of his calm. "Why?" "Because men who step in when pain says run often have storms elsewhere," Ridge said. It wasn't prying. It was a guess from a man who'd seen parking lots, sawdust, judges, all. "The places a human tries to stay upright. If there's a thing, there's always a thing," Cassian said quietly. He didn't add details. Not the balloon payment that would finally balloon. Not the text from the bank that carried. The tone of a cousin who'd never once visited nursing homes. "Good night, Ridge." Ridge studied his face 1 second longer, then nodded. "Good night, Cassian." The truck's engine turned over. Cassian stepped back and watched taillights angle toward the exit road. When they vanished, he stood alone again under the sodium. Lamp's migraine glow, the motorcycle humming the soft heat-cooling tick noises that a body makes when it remembers it is only metal. He should have felt better. He felt more awake instead, as if he'd just admitted something to the dark that he couldn't take back. He finished the shift. He cleaned the oil slick as if he could clean the night out of it too. He patched the guardrail scuff with a strip of hazard tape so the dawn manager could call the contractor with the right kind of urgency. At 4:52 a.m., he signed out on a clipboard that had seen too many names smudged into the same box. Home was a narrow 2-story on Haskell Street with a porch that groaned like an old man in a good mood and a mortgage that had begun to feel like a dare. He rolled his cart into the storage closet, locked up, and drove through a city that had not yet learned its morning voice. At his kitchen table, a stack of mail waited like a jury. He set the key bowl down and let his eyes rest on the top envelope, bank letterhead. The word "final" stood in small, firm type in the subject line, the kind of typography that enjoyed its job. He didn't open it. Not yet. He poured cereal, ate 2 bites, and realized hunger and fear taste too similar at that hour. He showered, the hot water needling the ache out of his shoulders, then lay on the couch with his arm over his eyes. The day came in slices of light through cheap blinds. He slept the way tired men sleep, as if whoever held the clock would be lenient this once. The doorbell woke him at 11:06 a.m. He sat up too fast, heart beating in the place where surprise and habit meet. Through the peephole, the world warped into a fisheye of leather and denim and sun. For a split second, he thought the night had come back larger. He opened the door because he had learned the only way out of a moment is through it. On the porch stood a woman in her 50s, wearing a faded canvas jacket that had known rain in 3 states. Her hair was silver gray, pulled into a low braid. Her eyes were the bright kind that had been honed on equal parts laughter and alarm. On the step behind her, a younger man, early 30s, shoulders like a gym's promise broken into muscle, a sling on his left arm, looked at Cassian with a grin that showed you his brother before it showed you him. "Cassian Holt?" the woman asked. "Yes," he said cautiously. "You helped my boy last night," she said. "Name's Ridge to his friends. To me, he's Tristan when I want him to know he still has a mother." Cassian felt the edges of the morning soften. "He shouldn't have given you my address." "He didn't," she said. "Ridge called a man. That man called a woman. That woman says she once watched you climb a ladder and fix a light over the loading dock after your shift because nobody else cared. Their workers clocked out in the dark. Word travels. Humans are the original internet." She smiled. A quick flash, then gone. I'm Mara. She nudged the man beside her. This is not... The younger man tipped his chin. Don't ask. It's a story involving rope, yes. No, I wasn't the one tied. Mara's eyes softened. We came to say thank you before your day disappears. Tristan wanted to come, but his ankle looks like a watermelon and his ego looks worse. That wrap stay on? Cassian asked, surprising. Himself, with how much he wanted to know. They stayed, Mara said. You did good. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small bakery box tied with string. Knots make cinnamon rolls that make sinners consider a new path. We would like you to eat at least 2. I don't deserve... You don't get to decide what you deserve today, Knots said cheerfully. We do. Cassian opened his mouth and found it was hard to argue with a man whose sling had cartoons drawn on it in Sharpie signatures. He stepped back. Would you like... Mara put a palm out gently. We're not here to sit. We're here to look you in the eye and say the thing people don't say enough. We see what you did, and it mattered. Her gaze flicked past him to the table. The final on the envelope had a way of being seen even when it was face down. She didn't comment. She shifted her weight instead, the way a person does when an instinct knocks on their ribs. This place... Yours? Yes. It will stay yours, she said, like a tone rather than a promise. Eat the rolls, drink water, sleep before your night eats you again. They left with the neatness of people who step in and step out before their weight is an imposition. Cassian closed the door and leaned the back of his head against it, the bakery box cool against his palm. He laughed once. It sounded like someone discovering their own voice again. He ate a roll with his fingers, standing at the counter, sugar melting into calluses. Then he opened the envelope. The bank's letter was written in the kind of language that pretends numbers aren't knives. 3 paragraphs, 7 dates, 1. Threat disguised as policy. He read it twice, as if the second time would make the third paragraph say, "We changed our minds." It didn't. He set the paper down carefully, like it might explode if he wrinkled it. His phone buzzed with a text from a man who signed his name with a last initial and a period, as if that would make him taller. Reminder. Meet at 3 p.m. to discuss the sale. My offer stands until end of week. D. Klein. Klein had the bony patience of a vulture with a calendar. He'd been circling since the first past due notice, smelling opportunity dressed as concern. Cassian picture-framed him at the grocery once, just to see him in a rectangle where he could be smaller. It helped. He didn't respond. At 2:16 p.m., he made coffee too strong and went out to the porch with a legal pad. Some problems liked lists. He wrote, "Call bank, ask for hardship, then check extra shift at hospital, then sell snowblower, regret later. Then call X about the dog? No." He stared at the last line and crossed it out. Some doors stayed closed for the goodness of everyone's shins. He was still staring when a row of engines rolled into the far end of his street like thunder taking notes. 3 bikes this time, then 5, then 9, not loud, a contained as if they were telling the neighborhood that quiet was still a courtesy they could offer. Cassian's neighbor's curtains twitched like polite eyebrows pretending not to eavesdrop. Mara rode point on a matte black bike that looked like it had more miles of story than miles of chrome. Knots rode pillion behind a man with a beard that was more philosophy than hair. A 4th rider cut the engines and put a boot down at the curb before Cassian's fence. The patch on his back said something he didn't read because he trained. His eyes to not make assumptions he wasn't ready to hold. Mara took off her helmet and smiled up at him. "Thought I told you to nap." "I forgot how," Cassian said. "The instructions got lost." She studied him. Then her face shifted the way a sky does when a cloud decides to say its true name. "All right. Business then. Ridge told me. How you moved the bike, how you wrapped him, how you didn't get heroic and also didn't get scared. That balance, that's rare. So I'm here to ask you something you can refuse. I try to say yes when I can, Cassian said. A habit he got from watching the world say no to people who needed yeses most. We need a hand at a charity run this weekend, Mara said. Parking cones, keeping the rookies from doing tricks their bones can't afford. Small dollars for a long day, plus meals, plus you get to watch grown men remember joy. It's silly and holy all at once. Knotts leaned an elbow on his good knee. And we need coffee that tastes like coffee, not penance. Calendar says, I scrub a university. Gym floor Saturday until it shines like a sermon, and then wax it until it's slippery as a lie, Cassian said. But I could do Sunday. My boss at the plaza owes me for swapping shifts last month. Sunday it is, Mara said. We start at dawn because charity looks better when the light catches it low. She reached into her jacket and handed him a lanyard. If you show, this gets you into places the cops pretend don't exist. He took it, surprised by how good it felt to be needed for something that wasn't an emergency. At 3:01, Klein's car rolled slowly down the street. Windows up, paint the color of insurance. He parked across from Cassian's house and didn't get out, perhaps deciding that a porch with 3 motorcycles and a woman who looked like she made rules for breakfast wasn't his kind of arena. He texted instead, I see you have visitors. Don't make choices you'll regret. 3:15. Don't be late. Cassian didn't answer. He looked at the bikes, at Mara, at people who smelled like asphalt and wind and those unphotographable parts of a map, and felt a question open in his chest. What if the people with loud engines were gentler than the ones who parked quietly and negotiated foreclosures? He set the lanyard on the porch rail like a promise he wasn't ready to promise. At 3:14, he put on his boots and told Mara, I have to go. Let a man be a man in a room where he thinks windows can't hear. If I'm not back in an hour, we'll get loud, Knott said, entirely sunny. Klein chose a coffee shop with reclaimed wood tables and a chalkboard that explained tasting notes like a poem about a tree that admired itself. He was already seated. He didn't stand when Cassian walked in. You look tired, Klein said. Tired men make mistakes. I clean up mistakes for a living, Cassian said, sitting. What do you want besides my house? Your relief, Klein said, and he might have believed it. You owe what? You owe. I offer you something soft to land on. You sign. You walk away with enough to start wherever men like you start. He folded his hands like a substitute pastor. Pride is expensive. So are other people's softly spoken solutions. Cassian put his phone on the table, face down. I'm asking the bank for a hardship adjustment. They'll say no. They might say yes. They won't, Klein said, not unkindly. And by the time you hear it, it'll be 2 weeks later, and you'll have lost both options. He slid a packet of papers across the table, the pages whispering the way paper whispers when it knows it's already been chosen. This is fair, more than fair. Cassian didn't touch them. What do you do with the houses? Make them better, Klein said. New roof, new plumbing. Sell to buyers who can keep them. And the people who had them? They learn to rent again, Klein said with a sympathetic, almost smile. Sometimes you have to go backward to go forward. Tire metaphors from a man whose hands have never been black with grease. Cassian said softly. He stood. I'll let you know. You won't, Klein said, voice cool. You'll wait until you're pulled out of that place, and then you'll call me, and I'll offer you less. Cassian met his eyes. Then I guess I'll be choosing something other than the soft landing. He walked out before the man could shape his next sentence. Outside, the light had shifted thinner. He could feel hunger drawn like a pencil line under his ribs. He walked fast for no good reason except that his feet wanted the ground to remember them. When he reached his block, he heard it before he saw it. Engines, many, not revving but alive. A collective breath of metal. The sound rolled over the houses in a tide, not violent, just filling space with fact. As he turned the corner, he stopped dead. Bikes lined the street in both directions, front wheels angled to the curb with a politeness that would have moved. A parking enforcement officer to tears. Leather and denim and flannel and faces, so many faces, some grizzled, some baby smooth, and trying to look otherwise. Engines idled low, a purr like cats the size of refrigerators, neighbors on porches. A kid in pink rain boots on a father's shoulders pointing like she discovered a parade. On his porch stood Mara. Ridge sat on the top step, crutches under his hands, ankle in a brace, eyebrow butterfly closed, smiling like a man who'd just taught his body to forgive gravity. Beside them, a man with a white beard that behaved like weather took off his helmet and rested it in the crook of his arm. He wore a leather cut with patches that read things Cassian didn't understand, and one that everyone could read: President. Cassian's mouth went dry in the way it does when the past, present, and future all want the same chair. Cassian Holt, Mara said, her voice carrying over the engines without effort, as if she were the kind of person the air had always listened to. Welcome home. The bearded man stepped forward, boots finding the path like he'd read the cracks in Cassian's sidewalk before. He stopped one step above the yard. He didn't offer his hand. He let the quiet get right to the place where it would tip, and then he saved it. I'm Donovan, he said. Some folks call me Dono. Most call me when something needs doing with more than 2 people. He nodded once. Ridge called me. Cassian found words. You brought... He gestured at the street as if language were a net too small for what his eyes were catching. Friends, Donovan said simply. Brothers, sisters, people who know what asphalt feels like through denim and what it means when a man moves towards someone on the ground when his job doesn't require it. He glanced at Ridge and smiled like a father who liked what he raised. Then he looked back to Cassian. There's a thing you need, Cassian, and there's a thing we needed to see you ask for. Cassian shook his head once. Careful. I'm not asking. Exactly, Donovan said, kind as a blade laid flat. Good. Then we'll do the asking. He lifted his chin. The engines went silent, as if one hand had turned a dial and the whole block obeyed. In the sudden quiet, Cassian could hear a single wind chime down the block argue with itself. Donovan took a breath. We are going to do something that will change the color of your mornings. He smiled small, like it wasn't his to make big. We're going to... Sirens wailed 3 streets over. Not close, not rushing. Just a statement that someone, somewhere, had opinions about so many bikes in one place. Heads turned. A woman across the street put her arms around her 2 boys. Without thinking, Mara's eyes flicked to Donovan's and back to Cassian's face, reading his heartbeat. Donovan didn't raise his voice. He didn't hurry. He said it like a man offering grace and a practical solution in the same sentence. We're going to pay off your mortgage. The words hung in the air like the first 3 drops of a storm you think might pass, and then realize. It intends to stay. Cassian's pulse drowned out everything. Sirens, engines, his own skepticism. He felt the ground and his knees, and for a terrifying second he wasn't sure those 2 remembered each other's names. He didn't cry, but he did closer things. Eyes burning, throat hot, chest opening like an old door that finally gave way. Not because someone kicked it, but because it had been asked gently too many times. Why? He said, a whisper that tried and failed to be a question. Because you didn't wait to be asked, Mara said, half smile, all truth. Donovan nodded once to someone behind him. A van door slid. A woman in a baseball cap took out a bright red lockbox. She set it on Cassian's porch step and clicked it open. Paper, stacks, banded and patient, the smell of ink and something else. Possibility. Neighbors leaned without meaning to. Cassian stared at the box the way you stare at a wild animal moving toward you with calm intentions. He shook his head again, small, again and again, like he could alter physics. Dono, Ridge said softly, from the step, and the president looked at him. Ridge tipped his chin toward Cassian. Say the other part. Donovan's eyes warmed. He looked at the man on the porch, then at the man in the yard, and he said, "There's a condition." Cassian let out the breath he wasn't aware he'd locked. Of course there was. The world smelled like strings unless proven otherwise. He nodded for Donovan to keep going, hands open at his sides, palms aching with the need to hold something. He didn't dare reach for. Donovan's smile didn't change. "You don't owe us." He paused to let that settle. "You just have to let us." A single cop car turned onto the block slowly, lights spinning, siren off. The officer behind, the wheel, looked at the lined street and did a math problem in his head, involving numbers and likelihoods and paperwork. He leaned his forearm on the open window and waited. Cassian looked from the red box to Donovan, to the neighbors, to the officer, and back. The sky above them had gone a soft afternoon white, the kind that made edges kinder. Somewhere, a child squealed, with glee because she had just been given a lollipop from a woman with a tattoo of a sparrow wearing a crown. The world was wrong and right at once. Cassian's lips parted to answer, and the sound caught on something he didn't recognize, not pride or shame or stubbornness, but a bone-deep fear of being seen accepting help. He swallowed. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Klein he didn't have to read to know its temperature. Across the street, the cop's radio crackled. On the porch, Mara's hand flexed, her eyes never leaving his face. "Cassian," Donovan said very quietly, like he was backing a skittish horse into a safer stall. "Sometimes somebody else holds the rope while you climb." Cassian looked at his hands, at the calluses that told his body's version of autobiography. He looked at Ridge's ankle, at the careful wrap he had made, while the night watched. He looked at the red box, waiting like a calm animal. "I don't know how to—" he began, and then a voice from the crowd cut through with a familiar rasp. "Then let us teach you." Every head turned, Mara's, Donovan's, Cassian's. A figure stepped from behind the bikes on the far side of the street, slight, shoulders narrow, moving with a cane that clicked like punctuation on the sidewalk. An old man with a face that time had written a whole book on. He lifted his chin. Cassian knew him instantly, though he couldn't place the chapter. The groceries night manager, yes. The one who loaned him a pen 3 years ago when the job application asked too many questions. The old man took one more step, and the crowd parted. Not because of who he was, but because he moved like someone who had earned the right to say one. "Last important thing," he pointed his cane at Cassian's chest and said, "Say yes, son." Cassian opened his mouth, and the siren that had been quieted barked once, short and imperative, as if the world itself were impatient to know his answer. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you." This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The siren's single bark broke like a dropped plate against the afternoon, then settled into silence again, leaving the block with nothing but breath and waiting. Cassian felt every eye on him, the neighbors leaning forward without realizing it, the officer at the corner with his forearm draped over the window, the riders standing like an undulation of leather and denim under a sky that had decided to hover and watch. He could hear the slow tick of heat leaving Ridge's crutches where they leaned against the porch rail. He could hear his own heart-count objections and then delete them one by one. "Say yes, son," the old man had said. Cane pointed at his chest like punctuation on a sentence that had been trying to write itself all morning. Cassian uncurled his hands. He wasn't good at accepting. He was built for other verbs: mend, brace, lift, sweep, carry. But the red lockbox on his step breathed like a creature that was not here to harm him. The neighbors hadn't gone back inside. Donovan's face was open and patient. Mara stood with her braid like a bright piece of truth down her back. Ridge watched him with a half-smile that asked nothing. He drew a breath that tasted like cold and cinnamon, and the first time anyone had ever said the word "we" to him and meant it as shelter. "Okay," he said. Not a shout, not a whisper, a word that let the world in. The street exhaled, 100 small movements of relief. Helmets tipped, shoulders loosened. A little girl clapped as if joy was something you gave the air just to see it sparkle. The officer at the corner reached up and clicked his light bar off. Donovan nodded once, like a man who had waited for a latch to click. "All right," he said, voice warm as a hand on a shoulder. "Here's how this goes. Payoffs are math-wrapped. In paper, the math changes by the day. We need an exact number from the bank today. Interest per diem, any fees, the stamp someone who gets paid to stamp insists on. After that, we need the form of payment they'll accept. They won't take cash. That looks like a movie scene. We do wires, cashier's checks. We do what keeps their compliance officer from having an apoplexy." Mara lifted the lockbox's lid and took out a folder thick with snapshots of authority, copies of Cassian's mortgage statements that Ridge had photographed on his kitchen table and texted to her when he learned what a balloon payment could do to a man's sleep. "We start with a payoff letter," she said. "You call, they'll put you on hold. We'll stand in your yard until they remember you're human." Cassian laughed, quick and startled. "I have no idea how to be the center of this." "Good," Donovan said dryly. "Men who love being the center cause paperwork." He gestured to the cop car. "Officer?" The officer rolled forward a few feet and leaned out. "Name's Perez," he said in that particular neighborly way some cops adopt when the heat index for trouble is low. "Looks like a block party with a purpose." "Sir, we're going to take a very peaceful field trip to a bank," Donovan said. "We'll leave your road better than we found it. We'll obey laws. And we'll text your lieutenant the route so no one panics and gives their cruiser a hernia." Perez's mouth twitched. "Coordinate with dispatch. I'll follow. For a stretch so the HOA group chat doesn't catch fire." "Appreciated," Mara said, already tapping her phone. Cassian stood very still, a legal pad's worth of steps suddenly scattered like leaves around him. "I should call the bank." "You should," Mara said. "Put it on speaker. We'll learn their hold music together." He dialed, hands steadier than he expected. The automated voice took him down corridors of numbers and options. He pressed 0 at the right moment because he had once cleaned under the desk of a customer service rep who told him the shortest path through a labyrinth is sometimes a punch to the operator button. He gave his loan number. He spelled his name. "Twice. I'd like a payoff demand," he said to the woman who finally answered, voice warm but tired, somewhere in a room with no windows he could picture perfectly. "Today." "What's the hurry?" she asked breezily, the way you ask when it's not your hurry. "We can mail it in 7 to 10 business days." 7 to 10 business hours ago, I was still a man who didn't know he had help, Cassian said. "Today would be good." Mara stepped closer, mouth tipped toward the phone. "Ask for the fax number to your branch," she murmured. "Ask if they can email a preliminary figure and then confirm final upon arrival. Use the phrase, time-sensitive housing matter." Cassian repeated her words with a care that felt like ritual. The woman's tone changed subtly. "Hold, sir." The hold music sounded like wind chimes underwater. While it played, Donovan turned to the street and lifted a hand. "Phones," he said. "You know what to do." The riders who were not already texting began to type like a chorus reading from the same score. Words went out along routes no city planner could map, through group chats and veterans' circles and women's riding crews and men who had once shared a wrench and a joke and a winter. The air became busy with invisible threads. Perez watched, eyebrows high. "That many people? Charity runs taught us everything we need to know about moving money legally," Mara said. "There are club funds we can tap for good. There are people who'd give $5 just to prove they could. There are patches in 3 counties who will ride at sunset if we ask." She glanced at Cassian, voice gentling. "You lit a signal flare last night without meaning to." The phone clicked. The woman returned with a voice brisker, as if a knob had been turned on her side of the office. "I can send a preliminary payoff statement to your email and to the..." A branch at Five Rivers. It will be valid through 5 p.m. local time today. Thank you, Cassian said, and he meant it like water. What form of payment do you accept? Wire transfer or cashier's check. No cash over 10,000 per instrument. The woman paused. And, sir? Yes? You don't get calls like this every day, she said softly. I hope your day goes the way it sounds like it should. He swallowed. Me too. They ended the call. Mara's phone pinged 3 times in succession. She opened the email and handed it to Cassian. The number on the screen looked unreal, like a valley seen from too high up. It's a cliff, he heard himself say. It's a climb, Donovan corrected. And climbs are what rope is for. The lockbox closed with a tidy click. Donovan lifted it like it weighed nothing and handed it to Mara. Let's move. They didn't roar out of the neighborhood. They poured, careful and quiet, like people leaving a church intent on peace. Perez pulled ahead, lights flashing but no siren. Cassian climbed into Mara's truck. Her aftermarket bench seat smelled like saddle soap and coffee. Ridge slid in behind him, crutches across his knees, grin lopsided with leftover adrenaline. Knotts waved at the kid in the pink boots and shouted, "We'll bring back a story!" The column of bikes stretched down, Haskell Street and around the corner, like a parade that remembered itself solemn at the edges. Neighbors filmed with their phones and then put their phones down, because some moments are for eyes, not screens. At Five Rivers Bank, the manager looked up and then looked up again, because perspective kept failing her. Riders eased into spots, with a choreography of courtesy that would embarrass most high school parking lots. Perez pulled to the curb and stepped out, arms loosely crossed, stance relaxed but alert. He might have been there to keep peace or to witness it. Inside, the bank's air was conditioned to a temperature that assumed money never got cold. A woman at the greeter's stand blinked at Cassian's small party, then at the window view. Beyond him, an ocean of leather and helmets, and then back at Cassian. "How can we help you?" Mara placed the payoff letter on the tall counter with the reverence you give a document that could change where someone sleeps. "We're here to pay this in full today." The greeter glanced down, then blinked again, as if completing a logic puzzle too quickly for her shift. "I'll get our branch manager." The manager, her badge said Nayar in small, neat letters, arrived with the body language of someone who could shepherd 6 crises at once and still remember to lock the back door at closing. She took in the letter, then Cassian, then the carefully, non-threatening cluster of riders at his shoulder. "Let's step into my office," she said. "We'll keep the lobby calm." Her office had a plant that had been watered on time for years and a framed photograph of a lake at dusk. She gestured them into chairs and stayed standing herself, as if motion kept her useful. She read the letter again, then tapped her keyboard. "All right," she said. "Payoff amount as of 5 p.m. today is here." She turned the screen just enough to be polite and careful. "We will need either a single wire for the full amount or cashier's checks, multiple instruments allowed, each under 10,000 because of federal reporting requirements. We will not accept cash over the counter for this amount." She met Cassian's eyes. "You understand why?" "Because rules have to pretend criminals are creative," Cassian said, surprising himself with the dry note in his voice. Nayar's mouth ticked. "Sometimes they're just persistent." She folded her hands. "Do you have a plan for the funds?" Mara lifted the lockbox and set it on the desk. "This is part," she said. "We also have riders who can obtain cashier's checks from their own banks within the hour. We have a club fund that can wire a portion if you'll provide coordinates. And we have sane, clean documentation for all of it." Naya looked at Mara, like a woman meeting a worthy opponent and possibly a future friend. "I can provide wiring instructions now. Cashier's checks should be made out to Five Rivers Bank. FBO," she named the servicer, the loan number. "We will require ID for anyone remitting on Mr. Holt's behalf. We will issue a stamped paid-in-full letter today once the amount's clear. She tilted her head. There is one complication I want you to be aware of. The room tightened. By a degree no thermostat could measure. Your mortgage was placed in an acceleration status, Nayar said to Cassian, calm and straightforward. Which is why the letter reads the way it does. This means all sums are due by the deadline. If not paid by 5 p.m., the file advances to our legal queue. At that point, it becomes more difficult to unwind. How difficult? Mara asked. Paperwork. Grows teeth, Nayar said. I have pulled the file to keep it within reach until close. That's what I can do, Cassian nodded. Thank you. It felt strange and correct to thank someone for not being a machine in a building made to house money. Outside the office window, engines murmured. The sound had become a pulse, a reminder. Nayar printed the instructions and slid them across, crisp paper on wood. Let's move, Mara said, already texting. What happened next? Unspooled not like chaos, but like a dance the city didn't know it knew. Riders split into crews by direction. And Bank, Northside, Riverbend, Cascade. A dozen peeled off toward credit unions where tellers knew their children's birthdays. 3 who worked at logistics companies marched back into work on a Sunday in their cuts, scanned their badges, and asked their supervisors to authorize wires for a cause that makes us look good, if anyone asks. An older woman with a braid, longer than Mara's, opened a battered ledger and began to tally, every number placed like a bead in a string. No waste, no lost count. Knott stood on a bench out front and held up a helmet. People walked by on sidewalks and put small bills and folded 20s into it, as if they had been waiting to test an old muscle called generosity. Perez accepted nothing, but he did reach up and straighten one rider's vest with an absent gesture that might have meant, look your best when you do your best. Cassian stood in the doorway between cool bank air and the warm noise of the street, and tried to be the right size for this moment. He wanted to be smaller so the crowd wouldn't see him. He wanted to be larger so they could. He settled for being present, breath in, breath out, legal pad in hand he wasn't writing on. Ridge limped down 2 steps and bumped his shoulder gently. Breathe, Holt. I keep thinking I'll wake up back on my couch, Cassian said. You will, Ridge said, but the house will still be there. A maroon sedan slid into a space across the street with irritating precision. Klein stepped out, smoothing his jacket like he believed in lines other people had to stand in. He surveyed the bikes, the way you survey weather you didn't order, and then fixed his face into concern. He crossed the street without looking up, as if crosswalks obeyed him. Mr. Holt, he said when he reached the bank steps, can we talk? We're in the middle of something, Cassian said without heat. Klein tilted his head toward the ocean of leather behind Cassian. I can see that. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Crowds are good at theater. Banks are good at math. I filed the assignment this morning. He slid a paper from a leather folder as if he delighted in the choreography of it. The note transfers to my holding company at close of business today. If you don't make payoff by 5, you'll be dealing with me, not 5 Rivers. My terms will be... Mara descended the last step and stood between Klein and Cassian like a line drawn with a carpenter's chalk. Shorter than our ability to tolerate you, she said affably. Step aside. Grown-ups are at work. Klein's nostrils flared. Do you even have the funds? Enough to buy the patience to tolerate this conversation, Mara said, not moving. Donovan joined her with the kind of stillness that made 2 men and their shadows look like a closed door. Mr. Klein, he said, in a voice that contained politeness and a warning. Inside they have receipts, outside we have time. You have neither. Klein looked past Donovan at Cassian like a man trying to find a sympathetic juror. You don't know these people. You think they leave when the adrenaline does. Cassian glanced at Ridge's ankle. He looked at Mara's braid and Donovan's, eyes that had the patient brightness of men who had changed tires at midnight in rain. I know what they did when the adrenaline was there, he said. That's enough for me. Klein's smile sharpened. You think the bank will take 20 cashier's checks and a folktale? Nayar, who had quietly stepped outside and now stood one pace behind Cassian, said, Yes, if the folktale comes with IDs, we will take every instrument that meets regulation. We know how to handle good days. She looked at Klein with surgical neutrality. If the assignment records today, we will wire any funds received before 5 to the new servicer under our obligations and obtain a payoff acknowledgement. If received after 5, we will follow the assignment. The way interfering with our customers in the doorway is discouraged. Klein blinked, unused to a bank speaking like a person. He put the paper back in his folder with a little more. Force than necessary, retreated 2 steps and took out his phone like a talisman. See you at 5:01, he said, and walked back toward his car. Inside the bank, the line at the teller windows had grown with riders returning like tides. Hands full of envelopes, pockets bristling with money orders, faces flushed from rides. Made fast and legal, each one stepped up, presented an ID, laid down their small square of a bigger yes. Nayar had opened 2 closed windows and a back-office printer. Someone had put on coffee. A teller with the name tag Joy looked like she meant it. Cassian signed a form that said he wanted a thing he had been wanting privately for years. He initialed paragraphs that cemented reality in ink. He felt like a man cutting the last chords of something he had dragged too long. On the sidewalk outside, Mara's ledger grew lines and totals, her pencil sharp and unmerciful. Section A, $54,220, she said without looking up. Section B, $38,900. Westgate, $21,350. Club wire, pending acknowledgement. Wire received, Nayar called from the doorway 5 minutes later, voice brighter by half a degree. Posting now! The bank lobby became a kind of church that didn't need hymns, not clapping, no one wanted to jinx the math, but a hum of shoulders settling, heads tipping back, breaths exhaled as if a crack in a boat had just been corked from the right side. Perez, who had migrated inside because sometimes you watch history from the threshold and sometimes you lean on a pillar and honor it up close, checked his watch. You're racing the clock, he murmured to no one and everyone. Clocks love races, Mara said without looking up. They like to think they win. 30 minutes to 5. 24. Riders still trickled in, helmets under their arms, hair wild from wind, smiles like weather had chosen them for once. A woman in a red flannel shirt trotted up to the counter with a cashier's check and said, "From Truckee Group, couldn't ride, wired the check to my mom to bring." Joy took it with both hands, reverent. Nayar appeared again, a stack of papers in a neat file. "We are within $603.19 of payoff," she said, voice steady, but eyes bright like she'd allowed herself to care. "We will make the final call to verify per diem at 450 to ensure no penny hides under a chair." 603, Donovan repeated, like a number he would remember forever on purpose. Knotts, who had been moving like a satellite, between clusters of people and the door, hopped onto his bench again. "Who has 603 and 19 cents of belief in their pocket?" he called, grin wide. Helmets lifted, pockets turned, coins clinked into a paper cup. Someone threw in a ring of keys by accident and then laughed and took them back. "Got it," Knotts said 2 minutes later, shaking the cup with glee. "And 19 cents in justice." "Justice likes interest," Mara said. "Keep the 19 for donuts." 5 minutes to 5. Nayar dialed the service's number again on speaker, introduced herself, gave the loan number, confirmed identity checks like a ritual at a river crossing. "We are remitting payoff," she said. "Please confirm today's per diem and acceptance of funds en route. Hold music." It sounded like a different song this time, a little less underwater. Perez glanced at his radio as it crackled. "You've got 5, folks," he said mildly, even though no one needed the reminder. The line clicked. A new voice, male, bored, careful. Per diem confirmed. Total is, he named the number. We will issue a zero-balance letter upon confirmation of incoming wire and receipt of cashier's instrument scanned by branch. Scanning, Naya said, fingers already flying. Transmit. She hit a key. The multifunction copier behind her hummed a little louder, as if it had been waiting to star in someone's story. Klein reappeared at the door with a smile that had sharpened into something brittle. Time, he said softly to Cassian, like they were alone in a crowded room. You don't have enough. Ridge shifted his crutches and, without speaking, moved a fraction of an inch so that his body sat in Klein's line of sight. A different kind of clock ticked, one that measured how long a man could keep trying to own a moment someone else had already filled. Naya's printer spit, clicked, dinged a sound that had the specific timbre of bureaucracy cooperating. She looked at the screen and then at the machine. Her face changed. What? Mara asked, voice too calm to be anything but practice. Naya held up a hand. She tapped a key, frowned, tapped again. On the screen something flashed red, then calmed, then flashed again. The wire, it's flagged, she said, more to the machine than to the people. Not declined, held. The receiving bank's fraud department wants a review because of a mismatch in remitter name. Club fund account versus individual borrower. She pressed the headset closer to her ear. Yes, I'm here. Yes, I just got the notice. Yes, I can send confirming documentation. No, I do not have 30 minutes. Our close is in... She looked at the clock above the door. 9. The lobby pulled in on itself, sound dimming, bodies stilling as if waiting allowed the wire to hurry. Donovan's jaw worked once, the only movement in a face otherwise carved from patience. Mara straightened to her full height, the way a wire, a pulls taut between two poles. What do they need? She asked. Say it and we'll throw it at them faster than they can say no. Authorization letter from the club. Copy of charter paperwork, letter of intent from borrower, allowing third-party remittance. Board resolution, if applicable, Naya recited, reading off a list she'd met before in different rooms with different people trying to solve different desperate things. Mara snapped her fingers once. Knots! He was already moving, eyes bright. On it! He sprinted for the door. Fax works faster because their email server eats attachments. Naya added calm in crisis. Old school wins when new school panics. Who even has a fax? Ridge asked, incredulous and delighted. We do, Naya said, and so does City Storage on Alder if ours decides it needs a vacation. Knots nearly collided with Donovan on his sprint back in, with a black binder that had the patina of 1,000 meetings and 3 barbecues. Donovan slipped a paper free with a satisfaction like muscle memory. Resolution authorizing charitable disbursement, he said. Signed. He looked at Mara. Charter copy. Truck glove compartment, she said. Top shelf. She tossed her keys to a woman in a green bandana who caught them without looking and vanished, weaving through bikes like she'd been born to it. Cassian stood there useless and necessary and shaking inside, a man asked to witness his own life, being held together by people who enjoyed the work. He pressed his knuckles to his mouth and tasted the faint citrus of the cleaner he had used every night to make the plaza's floors smell like somebody cared. Klein checked his watch with theatrical subtlety that fooled no one. 4 minutes. Green. Bandana returned with photocopies in a clear sleeve. Mara slid documents onto Naya's desk in a fan that would make a poker dealer weep with professional admiration. Naya fed them to the scanner, slapped the lid, hit the button. The machine whirred, digitized, flung little pixels of hope down a line built for tax seasons and loan renewals. Incoming, said a voice tinny and irritable from Naya's headset. Reviewing. 3 minutes. Perez moved to stand beside. Klein, without touching him, presence the only statement he needed. The officer's radio hissed again and then subsided like a dog deciding it would not bark after all. 2 minutes. Naya's eyes flicked back and forth as if she could force the packet through by will. "Come on," she said under her breath, the first and only prayer she allowed herself out loud at work. 1 minute, Klein said, and for the first time his voice wobbled, a hairline crack in porcelain. "Don't narrate," Mara said softly. You're not that important. 50 seconds, 40. The scanner beeped a tone Naya didn't recognize, a polite ding that could have meant yes or its evil twin. Her headset filled with a new voice. "Wire release authorized," it said. "Funds inbound, hold removed." Joy made a sound at her window that could have been a laugh or a sob. Perez closed his eyes for a beat, as if listening to his own pulse slow. Ridge's breath went out fast and shaky. Donovan didn't move at all except for the corners of his mouth, which lifted just enough for a man who didn't traffic in relief, unless it was earned. Naya reached for the printer, hand steady now. The machine word clicked, produced a page with a header that made Cassian's heart do a thing he wasn't ready for. Paid in full. She lifted it off the tray, and the lights dimmed. It wasn't a full outage. It was the flicker that warns you a storm, even if invisible, has decided to test your house out of season. The printer hiccuped. The screen froze. The page in Naya's hand was real, ink dry, edges warm. But on her monitor, the status circle spun, and then stopped with an error message. She stared at it, smile faltering. Our system froze before the acknowledgement code generated. She tapped the keyboard. The error did not move. We need the code to certify the closure. In the main ledger before 5, she said quietly, as if to herself and the machine and the room and the sky. If we don't, the file auto-advances. I can fix it in the morning if I have the code. If I don't, it goes into the queue and Klein's assignment kicks. She swallowed. The paper says paid. The machine doesn't yet agree. Klein's grin returned like a bad smell. Time, he said again, triumphant and small. Mara planted both palms on the desk and leaned in. Then say it to the right person, she said. Who gives you the code? Naya's finger hovered over a key she had pressed 1,000 times. Regional operations, she said, but they don't answer after 4:55 without a miracle. She looked up at the clock. It said 4:57, and the second hand looked pleased with itself. Donovan turned toward the riders at the door, toward the street as if the sky might be persuaded. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "Find me a miracle." The lobby held its breath, caught between a stamped sheet of paper that said a life had changed and a screen that insisted it had not. Outside, somewhere deep in the knitting of afternoon, clouds moved. Phones lit, 100 hands reached, 1,000 small connections sparked. Cassian felt his throat close around a sound that was not a sob and not a laugh and not a prayer and not a curse, but some shape of all of them. Perez's radio crackled, one last time with a voice that might have been dispatch or an angel pretending. Operations on line 2, it said, like an eclipse giving back the sun. Naya stabbed the blinking light on her phone. This is Naya at 5 Rivers. Yes. Holt. Cassian. Yes. Funds received. Our system froze. Acknowledgement code needed. Before close, she listened, face a study in the millimeters between hope and no. What is it? Cassian whispered, but no one answered because the room had become a vessel for one voice. Naya nodded once. Twice. Her shoulders came down. She reached for a pen like a woman catching a rope thrown from a boat. Code A719K, she repeated. Yes. Entering now. She typed slow and exact, one letter at a time. The screen shuddered as if waking from a bad dream. The circle spun a kinder spin. The green checkmark appeared like a small and perfect mercy. Naya looked up at Cassian, the page in her hand, and the code on her screen finally telling the same story. Congratulations, Mr. Holt, she said, voice breaking its own rule. Your home is yours. The lobby erupted, not a roar but a tremor, as if every body shook in relief all at once. Perez clapped exactly once, like a judge ending court in kindness. Joy dabbed her eyes with the deposit slip. Ridge laughed and slapped the top of the nearest chair with his palm, and then winced and laughed again. Mara put her forehead to the printer for a heartbeat, like a woman thanking an altar for humbling itself. Donovan did not move. Not yet. He stood with his hands folded, watching Cassian as if this was the only part worth watching. Cassian reached for the paper. Nayar handed it to him. Paid in full. The letters said, black and unassailable. The date, the time, the numbers that had once sat on his chest and counted while he tried to sleep, reduced now to a line that meant done. He held it like a newborn, awkward and fierce. The room blurred. The air tasted like a lemon slice and a laugh. He opened his mouth to say thank you and found the words were too small and the moment too big, and the only sound that fit was a breath that started in his ribs and shook the dust off some old internal beam and came out as the beginning of a yes that would cut him free from so many kinds of no. Cassian. A voice called from the doorway behind him, thin, high, urgent. He turned. On the sidewalk, the old man with the cane stood with a face gone grey like paper ash. He gripped the doorframe and said, voice shivering, "Your house." He swallowed. There's smoke. The paper in Cassian's hand didn't fall. His heart did. He ran. He ran down the steps, across the bank's polished tile, out through the double doors that breathed cold into his face. The afternoon had gone thin and high, sunlight worn to a filament, wind angling down Haskell Street like a rumour. He ran past Perez, who was already barking into his radio, "Structure fire, Haskell and 3rd, single-family residence, smoke visible." Past Knotts, who fell in at his shoulder without asking, past the line of bikes that turned as one, Keys, twisting, engines coughing awake like a 100-throated animal, getting out of bed angry that it had to. He ran like a man whose name was tethered to wood and shingles and a porch that creaked when it liked you. The paid-in-full paper was a rectangle of heat in his hand. He jammed it into his jacket with a clumsy care that felt like blasphemy and protection at once. The sidewalk tilted toward him, his lungs turned into doors that slammed and slammed. He didn't feel the curb. He didn't feel the moment his boots scuffed and nearly took him to his knees. He felt only the crowd part, the bikes flanking him like outriders in a guard he hadn't earned. Smoke lifted over the tops of ranch roofs 2 blocks ahead. Not black, thank God, not black, but a wavering grey, the kind a house makes when it tries to tell you it can fix this if you get there fast enough. Back's clear. Someone shouted from 3 houses down as they sprinted ahead and cut through a hedge that had always hated Cassian's shins. Mara blew past him with a look that said, "Don't be stupid, and I'll be stupider if you are." When he stumbled onto his block, the sight hit him like history. His house exhaling a tired dragon through the soffit vents, curls of grey sneaking from the kitchen window as if guilt had learned to smoke. The old man with the cane stood on the sidewalk with a neighbour's garden hose, jets of hopeful nothing arcing at the eaves. "Heard a pop," the old man said when he saw Cassian, his eyes watering from more than just the wind. "Saw smoke, called it in, doors locked." "Everyone out?" Perez demanded, sliding to a stop, his shoulder pressing his radio like a lover who knew how to listen. "Anyone inside?" "No one," Cassian said. The word caught on 5,000 micro-memories. Coffee mugs, the couch groove that had learned. His body, a nail above the sink where his father's pocket knife sometimes hung drying after he cleaned it like it was a prayer. Just things. He said it and felt the lie. It was an old truth trying to act young again. Things are not just things when they are the map you use to return to yourself. A siren's long spine bent into his street, then another, and the block rearranged itself at the speed of training. Bikes slid curbside nose to tail. riders became. Traffic cones and flaggers and a corridor of human hands lifting kids to porches, making space for the big red bodies of engines to come in like saints with water. Perez planted himself in the center of the road and directed without shouting. Donovan put 2 palms on Cassian's chest and stepped him back a foot, then another, a gentleness that was also an order. "Let them do the work they're built for," he said. "Yours is to stand and breathe and not make anyone have to save you." The first engine hissed into place. Firefighters spilled out with a choreography that would insult them if you called it a dance. Hose snaked, hydrant spun, a nozzle shouldered like a beast. A woman with soot already smudging her cheek took the front steps in 2 and drove the Halligan into the doorframe with a sound that made every other sound step aside. The door lost the will to be a door. Heat breathed out, a hot, wet cough. Smoke rolled low, the kind that looks ordinary until you try to breathe it. "Kitchen!" the nozzle's man shouted. "Left side!" Mara grabbed Cassian's sleeve as he took a reflex step forward. "You go in and you make a widow of a house that just learned your name again," she snapped. "I swear, Holt, I will sit on you." "Knife," he said before his brain could throttle his mouth. "My father's above the sink." She didn't roll her eyes, because this was not the time to mock grief. She did it with her voice instead. "Then we'll find it when the building stops arguing with the idea of being a building." Steam rose as the first line hit the fire. It sounded like rage cooling. A second crew took the back door, glass sugar shattering as they cleared their path. Ridge limped up with crutches under one arm like a man who had decided his ankle could file a complaint later. He took the hose back-up position like he'd been born with turnout gear and the stubbornness to use it. The captain swore at him and then didn't, because his stance, his weight, his eyes said, "I know how not to die in a room." Perez stepped in and pulled him back a foot anyway. "You can help on the outside," he said. "You're already a liability inside with that ankle." Ridge grinned. "Been called worse." He grabbed the next section of hose and did the physics from the lawn. Neighbors moved like water finding low places it can fill. Mrs. Ortiz, from 2 houses down, dragged a plastic bin up Cassian's steps and began clearing his porch. The wind chime, the stack of junk mail, the clay pot with a basil plant that had stubbornly survived 2 frosts. "Save what you can reach," she muttered, as if to the basil. "You made too much good spaghetti for this town to let you go down on a Monday." Knots. It vanished and came back with a blue tarp. "If it's not burning, it's going on this," he said, as if they were moving an office, not a life. He and a teenager Cassian recognized by his skateboard lowered the living room bookshelf, wobbling it like a drunk. Books slid off and slapped onto the tarp. Paperbacks with cracked spines, a manual for a dishwasher he hadn't owned in 5 years, a map book with folded corners like 1,000 decisions. Inside, a voice shouted, "Knock down!" and the air changed. It wasn't victory. It was the part where the fight goes to the ground, and you have to be even smarter. Cassian stood and shook because there was nothing else his body could invent that wouldn't get him arrested or killed. He watched water pulse through his front door in bright, muscular arcs. He watched smoke find the eaves and complain about being evicted. He pressed his thumb into the corner of his own palm, a little pain to keep from inventing more. Klein's maroon sedan rolled to the mouth of the block, paused like a man deciding between church and curiosity, then pulled away. Very slow, very civilized. Cassian didn't see it. Perez did. His jaw said later. A firefighter emerged from the front room with a saved-in-the-last-second armful of framed things. 2 photos damp at the edges. A diploma that had never been hung because life hadn't gotten around to telling Cassian that he could be proud of it. A picture of a boy with wide ears and fierce eyes, holding a fish larger than his ribs. The firefighter set them on the tarp, like you set down a sleeping infant others will be gentle with. "Main bodies out," he said. To Cassidy, without realizing, he'd shifted the man's name into a different spelling in his adrenaline. "Overhaul now. You can't go in yet." "Is it?" Cassian began. Words stuck between "is it gone" and "is it my fault?" and "is it okay to ask for anything ever again?" He swallowed, tasted copper. "What happened?" "Looks like an outlet," the firefighter said. "Old house, old wiring, new appetite, space heater or a cheap charger maybe. We'll have the investigator decide later. For now, we pull baseboards, check for extension. You'll be okay. Not pretty, but okay." He was a good man with a tired face. He didn't promise more than he could deliver. He left to go pry his way into a wall and see if fire had learned to hide. Mara eased the paid-in-full paper out of Cassian's jacket like a thief stealing a bad dream. She slid it into a ziplock that someone's sister produced like magic from a purse that had solved 3 lives already. "This lives," Mara said, "no matter what else." An hour passed, measured in wall crawls and ceiling punches, in dirty water dripping off batten boards onto floors that would remember. When the nozzles went to a mist and then to a drip, when the firefighters moved like men who had earned their next breath, the captain came over with his helmet in his hands. "You can go inside," he said. "Stay out of the kitchen. It's a swamp in there. We'll board up what we need to when we finish." He glanced at Mara like he recognized competence when it carried a braid. "You with him?" "I'm the sign that says don't be an idiot," she said. "Good," the captain said dryly. "Every scene needs one of those." Cassian stepped through his threshold. The house smelled like a burned dinner multiplied by 1,000 and baptized in a river. Steam fogged his lashes. Footprints in ash mapped where strangers had saved him. He moved with a careful reverence that felt like an apology. "Sorry, wall. Sorry, couch. Sorry, map of my life." In the kitchen doorway, he stopped because the room he knew had been translated into another language. The cabinet above the sink hung open, its contents half evacuated in a rush. The knife rack was a smear of soot and a miracle of 3 knives clinging. On the nail above the sink, something dull glinted through black. He stepped close and reached, fingers trembling, and found it. His father's pocket knife, hinge stiff from heat, wood scales charred to a dark he had never seen on it. He closed his eyes. For a second, he was 10 again, watching hands larger than the world carve an apple, the shavings falling into a paper towel nest. He slid the knife into his pocket and pressed it there until his palm found the shape of the man whose voice he still sometimes argued with at 3 in the morning. "Found you," he whispered to whatever part of memory listens. Behind him, someone coughed, not smoke, but tears pretending to be smoke. The old man with the cane stood in the doorway, his face grey-white with shock and relief. "Thought I'd lost my best neighbor," he said. "Turns out I just lost a little paint off my nerves." He wagged his cane at Cassian's chest. "Told you to say yes." "You did," Cassian said, his throat full. "You saved my house." "I saved my own," the old man said briskly. "Fire eats fences the way gossip eats truth." He sniffed hard. "I'll bring sugar for your coffee tomorrow and pretend the world has always been kind." Out front, the neighborhood had turned into a work site that didn't wait for a permit. Tarps stretched. Plywood appeared from somewhere that smelt of garages. Riders in gloves worked silent as carpenters holding their breath. Knots requisitioned a generator from a man whose name was a paint store. Someone else ran extension cords that were, Mara noted with gallows humor, up to code. Perez copied names for the report with a pen he kept for moments. He wanted to remember, remembering. He watched the block and allowed himself the luxury of thinking, "This is how it's supposed to be," then shook it off because his job was to be here when it wasn't. Nayar arrived quietly in a sedan that looked like it had opened. He stepped close and reached, fingers trembling, and found it. His father's pocket knife, hinge stiff from heat, wood scales charred to a dark he had never seen on it. He closed his eyes. For a second, he was 10 again, watching hands larger than the world carve an apple, the shavings falling into a paper towel nest. He slid the knife into his pocket and pressed it there until his palm found the shape of the man whose voice he still sometimes argued with at 3 in the morning. "Found you," he whispered to whatever part of memory listens. Behind him, someone coughed, not smoke, but tears pretending to be smoke. The old man with the cane stood in the doorway, his face grey-white with shock and relief. "Thought I'd lost my best neighbour," he said. "Turns out I just lost a little paint off my nerves." He wagged his cane at Cassian's chest. "Told you to say yes." "You did," Cassian said, his throat full. "You saved my house." "I saved my own," the old man said briskly. "Fire eats fences the way gossip eats truth." He sniffed hard. "I'll bring sugar for your coffee tomorrow and pretend the world has always been kind." Out front, the neighborhood had turned into a work site that didn't wait for a permit. Tarps stretched. Plywood appeared from somewhere that smelt of garages. Riders in gloves worked silent as carpenters holding their breath. Knots requisitioned a generator from a man whose name was a paint store. Someone else ran extension cords that were, Mara noted with gallows humor, up to code. Perez copied names for the report with a pen he kept for moments. He wanted to remember, remembering. He watched the block and allowed himself the luxury of thinking, "This is how it's supposed to be," then shook it off because his job was to be here when it wasn't. Nayar arrived quietly in a sedan that looked like it had only ever transported good news and quiet shoes. She carried a fireproof envelope. "I thought this belonged in your hand, not in an inbox," she said, pressing the paid-in-full letter, now stamped with a seal that felt like a small royal decree. "You'll get the recorded release later. This is for tonight." She looked over Cassian's shoulder into the dim house, then at the tarp full of saved books and the basil plant that had somehow survived all afternoon, and the old man with the cane lecturing a firefighter about the importance of not stepping on his petunias. "I have other clients," she said slowly, "who do not have this." She gestured vaguely at everything that meant we. "I am glad you do." "Me too," Cassian said. Then, because he was a man who knew how paper functioned in worlds that had less mercy than this block had tonight, he asked, "Is there anything I'm not thinking of?" Nayar's gaze flicked appropriate places. Roofline, soffit, char marks. On the bedroom door, where fire had licked and then been pulled back by men with water and nerve. "Insurance," she said. "Call them now. Start the claim while crews are still here to document. The sooner the better." She hesitated a fraction. "If you need a place to stay." "We'll put him at the lodge," Mara said. "There's room and there are people who will insist he eat instead of vibrating." Cassian nodded, dizzy with gratitude stacking too fast to store. He stepped aside, found a patch of porch where the boards were dry, and dialed the number he had paid in lumps once a year, like taxes he couldn't argue with. A cheerful recorded voice told him how important his call was. He pressed a number. When told, he held. The hold music was country light with lyrics about trucks and hearts that sounded like marketing had made them kiss. "Policy number?" the human finally asked. He read it off the paper he kept in the drawer by the stove, because that was where a man puts a thing he hopes he never needs during a meal. He gave his name, his address, the date and time. "Kitchen fire," he said. "Contained. Structural damage. We need—" He looked at his floor, at his walls, at the space where his air had learned a new smell. "We need help." The keyboard clattered on the other end. "Sir," the woman said after a pause, long enough to birth something unwelcome. "I'm not seeing this policy as active." He blinked. The word active sat in his ear like someone had poured a marble into it. "I paid in—" He stopped because memory kicked him in the ribs. January. He had written a check and then pulled it back because the electricity bill had snarled and the mortgage had snarled louder. He had meant to make it up. He had meant so many things. There must be a mistake, he said, and heard the hope rot in his own voice. I'm seeing a cancellation notice mailed 42 days ago, the woman said gently now, because it costs nothing to be kind when you are saying a thing you cannot change. Non-payment. There was a 10-day grace period. It expired. A soft exhale, the sound good customer service makes when it wishes it were law. I'm sorry. Behind him, the house creaked like it had heard and was embarrassed for him. I'll call back, he said, and hung up because staying on the line would make him a man who begged a voice he couldn't see. He stood very still with the phone in his hand, feeling like he had just paid off a mountain only to find a ravine. On the other side, with walls too smooth to climb and no rope. He looked at Mara because he didn't have anyone else to look at when he needed someone to remind him he was not a single human being pulling against a planet. No insurance, he said. It came out flat. I let it lapse. Mara didn't. Say, how could you? She didn't say why. She said, okay, with the iron softness of a decision. She turned and whistled, a sharp two-note sound like a shepherd's call. Heads turned. Listen up, she called, and the block did. House is paid off and hurt. Insurance is not coming. That means we are. Tonight we tarp and board. Tomorrow we gut and dry. By the weekend we frame. We are not going to let a piece of paper decide whether this man sleeps under his own roof. You hear me? A chorus answered. Yeah, yes. Hell yes. Say when. Knots beat his palm against his heart, like he couldn't find words big enough and his body had to invent one. Perez lowered his radio and came to stand beside Cassian. You're allowed to sit down, he said mildly, nodding toward the porch step where the basil sat like an optimist in a hard world. Everything's still going to happen if you do. Cassian sat. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and he did not cry because sometimes emptiness is too new to fill. He thought about the bank's air, about Nayar's precise pen, about Donovan's voice telling him rope is for climbs and for holding. He thought about his father's, knife warm against his thigh. He thought about the old man's cane, tapping the world into alignment just long enough to say the only sentence that mattered. Say yes, son. He lifted his head. Yes, he said into the block, to anyone and everyone and the boards of the porch. Not loud, just true. And the word did what words sometimes do when spoken at the right moment in the right company. It altered the rules. The riders moved faster. The neighbors stepped closer. The house, hurt and wet and ashamed of its inside-out self, seemed to lean forward. Night found them still working. The sky lowered until it could rest its chin on the rooftops. Lamps appeared. String lights slung from handlebars to gutters. Bright circles on tripods hauled out of a painter's van. Someone brought chili in a pot so large it made every other pot in town feel inadequate. A voice rose from the end of the block, carrying like a bell. Roll call, someone yelled, and the street answered back in waves of names and road handles that sounded like weather and animals and tools and old jokes. Spool, Doc, June, Whisper, Tanker, Sainter, Macca, Honey, Switch, Bird, Gear, Lobo, Patch, Tally. Perez stood and listened and allowed himself a private smile he would deny under oath. He looked toward the far end of the street, where in the shadows a maroon car had parked again for a minute and then melted away. Cowardice finding the lane it always uses. He filed the plate number in his head beside 3 other facts he would choose the right moment for near midnight. The last hose hissed into silence. The captain signed a paper and shook Cassian's hand with a firm, unromantic grip. It'll smell like hell for a week, he said. Then it'll smell like sawdust, which is a nice improvement if you ask me. He tipped his helmet to Mara. You keep running scenes for me after I leave, and I'm putting you on payroll. Can you afford me? She shot back. Not a chance, he said, and grinned. The engine's red lights walked down the block and turned away. Mara clapped her hands once. "Okay, we're done scaring the neighbors. If you don't live on this street or you're not on the Dawn crew, go home. The rest of you get 5 hours and come back with gloves. We're going to make a building remember how to be proud." They dispersed reluctantly, like a good party that had to admit the morning was an actual thing. Cassian stood in the quiet that followed, a silence full of hammer sounds that hadn't started yet. He felt the weight of the day hang on his shoulders and then resettle somewhere a human can carry it. On his porch rail, the paid-in-full letter gleamed under a clip like a flag saying, "This ground is named." He touched it with 2 fingers like a man making sure he hadn't dreamed. "Sleep," Mara said at his side. "You won't do anyone any good if you greet the sunrise like a ghost." She nodded toward the lodge, a low building 3 blocks away, owned by a crew who believed in pool tables, coffee, and shelter. "We made up the back room. There's a cot. It doesn't complain." He hesitated. He looked at his house with its wounded windows and its tarped sorrow. "Feels wrong to leave," he admitted quietly. "That's because love makes your feet sticky," she said. "You can bring them back in the morning." He laughed, and the sound surprised him by not cracking. "You always talk like this?" "Only when the universe requires it," she said. "Come on." He let himself be shepherded. Knotts shoved a duffel into his hands that had a toothbrush, a T-shirt that would be too big and make him look like a kid at a sleepover, and a book someone thought would compete with exhaustion. The old man with the cane tapped his shin with the cane's rubber foot. "You forget to come back," he said, "and I'll steal your basil." "I believe you," Cassian said. He glanced once more at the rail, at the clipped paper, then followed Mara down the steps. The lodge smelled like old wood and new coffee and 100 stories that had been told at 3 in the morning and survived the telling. A woman with a tattoo of a sparrow wearing a crown pointed him to the back room and handed him a folded blanket that looked like it had won a fight against winter. "If you need to wake up 10 times to check your front door is still there," she said, "do it. We'll be here to confirm." He lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling, which had water stains that looked like maps of islands he would name later. He took his father's knife from his pocket and set it on the chair by the bed. He set the paid-in-full letter under his pillow like some talisman that could keep structure in place. He closed his eyes. His body decided without asking him that. Sleeping was a vote of confidence. He dropped. He woke in the blue before dawn to a sound he first thought was his heart learning drums, and then realized was engines, far, wide, layered, like a weather system had chosen internal combustion as a language. He sat up. The lodge's thin wall vibrated like a happy animal. He swung his feet to the floor, pulled on boots, and stepped into the hall. Mara stood at the front door, arms folded, face in silhouette. She didn't turn. She knew his steps now. "Ready?" "I don't know what that word means anymore," he said, but he smiled. "Yes." They stepped onto the porch. Up Haskell, as far as he could see, there were bikes, light catching on chrome and matte swallowing it. Dew on seats and helmets like a terrible, beautiful constellation had fallen to earth and decided to make itself useful. At the head of the column, a patch he had only seen in movies gleamed. The winged death's head that had been misunderstood and glamorized and feared, and in some corners quietly beloved for the rare, messy charity stuck to it like a stubborn toddler. Beside those patches were others. Local crews, veterans associations, Christian motor groups, the irreligious and the very religious, and the ones who would rather argue about carburetors than gods. Donovan stood at the front, with a man whose beard looked like a storm front, and whose eyes were old in a way that hadn't made them unkind. The engines idled, and the street trembled, as if acknowledging an army that had decided to use its powers for carpentry. A little girl in pink boots yawned massively, and then clapped because any excuse is a good excuse at that age. Donovan lifted a hand, and the sound eased like someone turning down an argument. He looked at Cassian and inclined his head once in, a gesture that felt older than the town. "You say the word," he called. Cassian swallowed. Words had done so much today. He reached into his pocket and touched the knife. He looked at his house. He looked at all the faces, at the patches that had seen fights and funerals and justice done badly and sometimes very well. He raised his voice just enough for the first 2 rows to hear and trusted the rest to pass it back like a good secret. "Let's build," he said. The engines answered by quieting. The men and women answered by moving. The day answered by stepping aside to make room. By 9 o'clock, the house had been flayed of what hurt it. Bubble-wrapped insulation dragged out like bad ideas exorcised. Charred studs cut back to honest wood, nails objectionable to hands pulled, and their holes blessed with new. Someone set up a saw station in the yard and apologized to the grass. A kid kept count of every 2x4 that went in like he was learning a new number system. Mara worked a ledger and a phone and a hammer without ever seeming to hold more than one thing at a time. Donovan floated in a 3-house radius, moving a step where it would save a back, lifting a corner with a palm like a father steadying a child's first bicycle. Reporters arrived because nothing travels faster than grief except a fix. Perez met them on the sidewalk and told them they could film so long as they spelled names right and didn't step on tarps. One asked about the patches. He said, "Those are people." Another asked if they were allowed to show the Hells Angels colors. He said, "You're allowed to show what's true." Just before noon, a flatbed rolled up with lumber paid for by men with week-old paychecks and women with tips that smelled like a diner's coffee. A man in a white shirt and tie got out of a sedan and adjusted his expression so it looked like concern. "Klein." He took 2 steps forward and stopped because Donovan and Mara took 1 step forward each, and 2 steps combined make a wall if you do it right. He tried to smile around them at Cassian. "Looks like you're getting help," he called politely. "I hope it's enough." "It is," Cassian said without looking at him again. Klein's smile dried. He retreated, turned, to find Perez polite and present and writing down a license. Plate number with crisp penmanship. Klein got in his car and did not peel out because men like him never let tires tell the truth about their tempers. By afternoon, the first new joists tied into the old bone. A roofer with a death wish that was actually a heavily insured life stood on the ridge and sang badly while he swung. In the kitchen, Ridge and 2 others framed a new wall, his ankle in a brace, his grin feral with usefulness. He tapped a stud into plumb with his hammer, like a drummer bringing a band back together. "How's it look?" he asked Cassian, breathless and proud. "Like a decision," Cassian said, "like it knows who it is again." Ridge nodded, his eyes gone bright. "That's the only answer I wanted." Across the street, the old man with the cane ran a 1-man logistics operation involving lemonade, folding chairs, and unsolicited advice. "Don't overnail," he told a young carpenter. "You're building a house, not a confession." Late afternoon leaned toward the kind of evening that would leave a bruise in memory, something you'd press to for proof later. The front door stood propped open, a rectangle framing labor's backs and shoulders, and laughter that didn't apologize for being loud, in a place that had recently been loud for worse reasons. Cassian stepped onto the porch for air he could call his own and found Mara there, already holding out a bottle of water like she'd anticipated the need 30 seconds before he did. He took it. Their shoulders touched. They watched the street not like generals surveying a battle, but like people at a birth who had been given the privilege of witnessing. "Tomorrow," she said, "plumbers, electricians. We'll get your wires speaking politely." And after, "That, drywall," she said, "paint floors. A new table because your old one was a liar about how many legs it had." He laughed, and the laugh didn't feel like an intruder on a sad day. "How do I pay all of you back?" "You don't," she said. "You pay forward. That's how the math works here." She tipped her chin at his pocket. "What's in there that you keep touching like a worry stone?" He pulled out the knife. She whistled softly. "That went to the edge and came back." "So did I," he said. "Get used to it," she said. "Nice edges, nicer returns." The sun clicked behind a neighbor's chimney. Shadows lengthened. The engines at the far end of the block, the ones that had idled all day like a heartbeat, so no one forgot what brought them, turned off one by one. Quiet dropped, not empty, just a deep chair silence you sit in after the guests leave, and you can still smell the good food. Donovan walked up the steps and stood with his back to the street, hands on his hips, taking in the house as if it were a motorcycle someone had just rebuilt out of honest steel and mistakes. "It'll stand," he said. "Tomorrow it'll stand prettier. 2 weeks, no one will know except the wood and you." He paused, tilted his head. "You hungry?" "I haven't been anything else for a year," Cassian said. "Good," Donovan said. "There's a potluck in the lodge parking lot that looks like a cookbook had a baby with a state fair. Go eat what people made angry at their ovens. When you come back, we'll lock your doors the way ordinary men do." Cassian nodded. He took 2 steps and then stopped because his phone buzzed. He glanced down, expecting a stray text from a bank or a neighbor or the universe. An unknown number. The message preview read, "Nice house. Shame if..." He opened it. The rest, no one could keep it safe forever. A photograph followed, taken from a low angle, his front porch at noon with him blurred in the doorway. A shot from earlier today, printed in pixels and suggestion. His stomach dropped. An elevator. With the cable cut, he showed Mara. Her face went still in the way that isn't fear, but is the thing fear respects. Donovan leaned in. Perez materialized as if the message had rung a bell only he could hear. "Stalker?" Perez asked, already moving the mental. "Pieces on a board he didn't let civilians see. Bullies who think property is how you measure a man," Mara said. "Same species as the ones who show up at women's shelters with flowers and bad intent." She looked at Cassian. "You got enemies?" "Only poverty," he said. "And a man who likes to talk about soft landings." Donovan's eyes were very calm. "Then we're not done yet." He lifted his chin at the far end of the block. Engines, which had been sleeping, woke like dogs at the whistle of someone they trusted. Perez's radio crackled. "Unit 12?" dispatch asked. "You still on scene?" "Affirmative," he said, eyes on the photo. "And we're not leaving." He looked at Cassian, then at the street pulsing with new, low light. "Lock your doors. Keep that paper. Close. If someone wants a fight, they just wandered into the wrong block." Cassian swallowed, the taste of ash and chili and adrenaline making a soup he'd remember. He looked at his house with its new bones showing and its old soul stubborn. He looked at the text that said the old rules were still trying to stand. He slid the phone into his pocket, next to the knife and the letter. He lifted his head and nodded once, like a man debating whether to speak, and then deciding his answer could be a posture. And in the midnight that smelled like wet wood and gasoline, and cinnamon and decision, the engines along Haskell Street rose together into a low, steady hum that said without words, "This ground is held."